Hello, welcome to another episode of cEDH Academy. This time we're going to be talking about something else that hurts us, a little bit ouchy, a little bit owie, something similar to ad nauseum that we talked about the other day. Ad nauseum pays a bunch of life, draw a bunch of cards. You know what we're going to do today? We're going to pay a bunch of life and draw a bunch of cards, and that's going to be with Necropotence. Necropotence is a 3 black mana enchantment that says you have to skip your draw step. Oh no, that sounds terrible. Hold on, it gets better. The next thing it says is whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. No, like... Trust me, it really gets better, I promise. The third thing is when you pay 1 life, you can exile the top card from your library face down and put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. And even that doesn't sound insane until you really get into how good it actually is and discover what you can do with it. So paying 1 life to draw 1 card, you have 40 life in Commander, so you can probably pay like 30 to 35 life in any given time when you get Necropotence out to be able to get 30 to 35 cards. If you have that many cards at the card quality you have in cEDH, you should be able to find a win from there. Now, skipping the draw step, that's a bummer. That's only 1 card per turn. In a world where we have things like Grixis Study drawing us like 10 plus cards per turn, that's like nothing. Missing out on 1 card draw is not that big a deal when you consider yourself to have 30 to 35 cards that are going in your hand at the end of this turn. And whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, that's not a replacement effect. That's a trigger that goes on a stack, and we can respond to that. This is also a tutorial for Necrodominance, but Necrodominance is very strictly worse than Necropotence. Therefore, we'll just cover that a little bit later, as the play patterns are basically all the same, but Necropotence is strictly better. This video will be focusing on the better version. Now, tips for what you can do with Necropotence to really take advantage of all the benefits it can give you. Typically, whenever you resolve this, you use like a Dark Ritual on turn 1 or something of that sort. Get it out by turn 2 absolutely latest, and in that turn you get it out, you probably use most, if not all of your mana to actually cast Necropotence. So what you likely will do is just to value Necropotence on the first turn, draw about 2 or 3 cards over what your hand size would be. That way you can curate your hand, have the best grip possible to have a really good grip going around the next turn rotation. Have maybe 1 or 2 interaction spells, some mana, some tutors, things like that. Find yourself a win on the next turn while also protection to make sure you get to your next turn. Exiling cards is a little scary, especially for newer players in cEDH, but once you get more familiar with your deck, you'll realize that there's some cards that you really just don't need anymore. Easy options would be like, yeah, you don't need that second or third land. You need only like 1 more at most for the next turn, because next turn we're going to try to jam and win the game. Now when it gets back to your next turn, you untap your mana, you have full ability to take advantage of Necropotence. That's when we're really going to jam. In many cases, you see Necropotence is paired with the color blue, and the reason for that is it allows you to cast flash enablers on the end step, because after you put all those cards into your hand, you then would have priority reset on the end phase that you can take actions on. At that point, you hold priority and cast maybe Born Upon the Wind or Valley Floodcaller. Born Upon the Wind is a 2 mana instant spell that says you can cast spells this turn as if they had flash. You're still in the end step. It's still during this turn. You can dump your whole hand at that point. It lets you draw a card as well, which can be valuable if you have something like Vampire Tutor that puts a card on top of your library they actually care to draw. That does come up a lot, but the biggest thing about Born Upon the Wind is the flash enabling. Now, Born Upon the Wind is 1 mana cheaper than Valley Floodcaller, which is a really big boost. It also lets you cast all spells, not just non-creature spells, which Valley Floodcaller limits you to non-creatures only. The trade-off for Valley Floodcaller is a creature, which makes it a lot harder to counter. It also can stick around the board so you can use it on multiple turns. But in Necropotence Turbo deck, we only need this turn, we only need this right now, so Born Upon the Wind will do the job. Now, with Born Upon the Wind enabled, you can do the fastest Oracle line with Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation. As fast as Oracle is a creature, you can't do this with Valley Floodcaller, but this is a very compact win condition. Full tutorial on how to do this win condition, prep for it, and play against it is linked in the description below. Even though this only requires blue and black to be able to pull off, a lot of times we don't actually see the Turbo Necropotence game plan being used in just a Dimir deck. In most cases, we see that used in a Grixis shell. The reason for that is because of Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach is a line you can do with Valley Floodcaller as well, because it's a non-creature line. Underworld Breach an enchantment, Lion's Eye Diamond an artifact, and then either Grinding Station or Brain Freeze being an instant or an artifact as well. Now remember, the trigger from Necropotence that says whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. When you crack Lion's Eye Diamond and put all your cards in the graveyard, that puts the trigger for Necropotence on the stack because it's not a replacement effect. Because you have a flash enabling option, you can respond to that trigger by keep doing a Brain Freeze, Lion's Eye Diamond loop, mill out your entire deck, and find your win from there. Another thing you can do in the Grixis shell, which makes this also part of the best shell for Necropotence Turbo lines, is you can have Foul Fortune, Last Chance, and Warrior's Oath. Last Chance and Warrior's Oath are just a sorcery speed version of Foul Fortune. They all do the same thing, just Foul Fortune is instant speed. They are all 2 red pips and say that you can take another turn after this one, and then you lose the game at the end of that turn. So if you have Necropotence Jam, you have access to 2 red mana, you draw a bunch of cards, maybe like 10 cards, something like that, curate, do your Foul Fortune turn at that point, and then go into your next turn with the mana untapped untapped, and then really jam with your Necropotence draws and try to find a Born Upon the Wind or other flash enabling win condition at the end step. Or perhaps you just drew your Thassa's Oracle win condition in hand, plus maybe one tutor, and you just win straight up on that next turn. Obviously, it's very risky to do that because you lose if you don't win on the next turn. However, if you try and go turbo, this allows you to try to sneak under the control decks getting set up. If you don't let them get their second or even third turn, it's that much more likely that they don't have the mana or resources available to actually stop your win attempt. There are a plethora of mana options to make mana through rituals, or from creating treasures, or from just mana rocks. Some ways of getting fast mana to be able to get this Necropotence out by turn 1, turn 2 latest, and then try to jam a win by turn 2 or turn 3 latest. On top of that is a plethora of protection pieces. These are all in the Grixis shell, ways of protecting not only Necropotence resolving, but also ways of protecting your win attempt. Red and black colors give you a lot of mana generation and ramp, while blue and red give you a lot of protection to try to secure your win with. Plus blue giving you flash enablers, red giving you Underworld Breach, and black of course giving you Necropotence itself. Now say that you have Necropotence on the stack, you don't have any way of protecting it, and someone's presenting a counterspell. A good political move to say is, hey, I'm out of this game if you counter this, and that's a valuable counterspell that you need to use on somebody else trying to win the game. How about I make a deal where as this resolves, I'll only draw a card to get my hand to 7 every turn. That way, so there's a draw engine that's worse than Ristic Study. I'm still in the game a little bit, but I'm not going to try jamming a win from it. This is just going to be a value engine. At that point, most people would allow this to resolve. The same reason most people allow Ristic Study to resolve. Counter magic is very limited, so a lot of people want to try to save it to stop a win attempt. For all intents and purposes, what they just did was stop your win attempt, but you softened the blow of that political decision by allowing yourself to still get more cards and stay in the game. Now, to defend against the Necropotence, yes, that is a fair deal to take, especially if you don't have a draw engine yourself, you're limited on your counter magic, and you're concerned somebody else might try to win against you. You've largely stifled the win attempt that the Necropotence player is going to be using, trying to keep them at bay for probably multiple turns. But if you feel strong enough that you can actually go and win the game and you don't really need that counter magic, then sure, counter that Necropotence, don't let them get any value whatsoever. Generally, if playing against a Grixis deck, which is red, blue, black, or most decks that have black in the color identity, you can just ask them, hey, are you on Necropotence or ad nauseam lines? The classic question where they're probably going to say yes or no comment, which no comment means yes. At that point, you would know, target that person with any damaging abilities, combat attacks, things like that, to try to whittle the health down, make them not be able to get as many cards. So with Necropotence, you can pay 1 life all the way down to 0 and die with it. So you can't pay more life than you have, but you can pay the equal amount of life you have. So because this goes by 1 at a time, you can lose the game by just paying off this 1 life over and over and over. And if you pay your last life, that's not a trigger on the stack. If you pay that last life, you lose instantly, something you can't respond to. So with that risk in mind, most people who play Necropotence will go down to maybe 3 life at lowest, usually around like 5 if they want to be a little safer. 3 HP should be just fine for using things like ping lands like City of Brass, fetch lands like Scalding Tarn, and shock lands like Water Grave if you need to use mana now, as well as being able to use Imperial Seal that makes you lose 2 life when you use this and resolves. Because of these pinging you for life, 3 HP is considered the absolute lowest, but 5 is that like safety zone that most people stop at. You also have to be mindful of things like Orchestral Masters and Lightning Bolt and other things that might ping you for damage in response to you trying to win the game. Now that we've talked about Necropotence, play patterns, win lines, things of that sort, let's talk about the worst version, Necrodominance. And why is this worse? Well, Necrodominance is the same amount of mana to cast. It's also enchantment. It also skips your draw step, but at the beginning of your end step, you may pay an amount of life, and if you do, draw that many cards. There's some things about that one. We'll stop there. So it says you have to draw those cards. Necropotence just puts in your hand. So in response to this trigger on the stack, someone could flash an Orcus Bowmasters and try to ping you out in a way that you can only draw about half the amount of cards you would have drawn with Necropotence. This also allows other players to draw cards through things like Consecrated Sphinx. So every time you draw a card, they draw 2. So they'll get double the amount of cards that you draw from your Necrodominance. It is fair that Consecrated Sphinx is rarely out before Necrodominance is, but things like that can be applicable. There's also the classic Smothering Tithe. So as you draw all these cards, you're also making the person with Smothering Tithe have a bunch of treasures. So this effect making you draw cards instead of just putting them in your hand from Necropotence means that Necrodominance has angles that other players can use, your opponents, to take advantage of your own value engine. This is also a trigger at the end step of your turn. So if someone did something like Chain of Vapor on your Necropotence, for example, in response, you can pay that life at instant speed in response to the Chain of Vapor on the stack. From that happening, you'd exile a bunch of cards from your library face down, and then even if that Chain of Vapor resolves, bouncing the Necropotence to your hand, the effect from Necropotence is still there. So at the beginning of your next end step, you will still get all of those cards. Meanwhile, if someone does a Chain of Vapor on your Necrodominance, and this happens before the beginning of your end step, you cannot respond by paying life to draw cards. Necrodominance is based on a trigger that goes on the stack at the beginning of your next end step. That means there's nothing you can do to protect your value. That just gets bounced. You might have been tapped out or whatever it may be, you have to recast Necrodominance on either this turn and now you can't jam, or on the next turn and you're even further far behind. Necrodominance also says your maximum hand size is 5. That straight up just means you have less value out of this card, because even though you can draw a bunch of cards at the end step and sculpt your hand to a perfect hand going on to the next turn, you'll now have only 5 cards instead of 7, which makes you have far less options to work with. Now, probably the worst part about Necrodominance is the very last line. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. This is a replacement effect. That means if you're trying to do the Underworld Breach Lion's Eye Diamond Brain Freeze line, you cast Underworld Breach, you cast Lion's Eye Diamond, you crack it, put all your cards in the graveyard, try use with Underworld Breach. All those cards don't actually go to your graveyard. They'll go to your exile instead. This is not a trigger on the stack that you can respond to at all. It just cuts off most of your Underworld Breach lines. So suddenly this non-creature wind line is no longer valid. To do this, you would have to hope that you have a Chain of Vapor of your own or something similar to bounce or destroy your Necrodominance before you go and do your Underworld Breach line. Meanwhile, with Necropotence, you can just do this line all willy-nilly, because the trigger for Necropotence goes on the stack to then put it from your graveyard to your exile, and you can just respond to that by continually doing your Underworld Breach line. So if you don't have a way of removing Necrodominance, then that last part of Necrodominance completely kills most of your win lines to try to jam on the end step. That's why in some decks you will see Necropotence as just a value piece, like Rakdos or Mono Black or something of that sort, but you'll never see Necrodominance in a deck unless it's a full turbo, no plans going mid-range. We're trying to just win as soon as possible, and we need every way of winning as fast as possible as we can get. Therefore, reluctantly, people add Necrodominance to their deck. So if you see a Necrodominance, you know that they are full Glass Cannon turbo. Very little mid-range value, where if it's Necropotence, it could just be like an Obnix list or some other kind of deck that's just looking to get general value from Necropotence. Though to be fair, most cases these days, if you see Necropotence, they're trying to be a turbo deck anyway. So that's Necropotence. If you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think about Necropotence in the current state of the meta, and let me know what other things you might want to see in future videos, as well as maybe there's something I missed in Necropotence. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching. I appreciate you.